What if I told you that the moment someone stops valuing you, they've actually handed you the greatest gift of your entire life? I know that sounds impossible right now, maybe even cruel, especially if you're sitting there, heart racing, wondering why they've gone quiet. Why have they pulled away? Why suddenly you feel like you're shouting into a void that swallows every word, every gesture, every desperate attempt to be seen? Maybe you're scrolling through their social media at 2 a.m., searching for clues about why you're no longer worth their time. Maybe you're crafting the perfect text message for the 100th time, hoping this one will finally break through their wall of indifference. Maybe you're lying awake, replaying every conversation, every moment, wondering what you did wrong. But stay with me, because what you're about to discover will completely transform how you see rejection, silence, and your own worth. You don't lose your worth when someone stops valuing you. Carl Jung said something profound: our value isn't determined by external validation, but by our relationship with our own unconscious mind. Think about it this way. When someone devalues you, they don't take anything away from you. They just lose their seat at your table. But here's the brutal truth that Jung uncovered through decades of studying human behavior. Most of us don't see it that way. Instead, we stand there, desperately waiting, begging them to sit back down, pleading for them to return to their chair. Why? Because we're terrified of facing what Jung called the shadow, those parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. But what if I told you that the most powerful response isn't to chase? Isn't it fixed? Isn't it easy to explain? What if the most powerful thing you could do is simply go silent? Let me paint you a picture. I was sitting across from someone I loved deeply. Someone I had built countless memories with. Someone whose opinion felt like oxygen to me. Carl Jung would have called this projection, when we place our sense of wholeness onto another person, making them responsible for our psychological well-being. I was pouring my heart out, desperately trying to make them see me, really see me. The words tumbled out like water from a broken dam. I was explaining, justifying, pleading. But what broke me wasn't their words. It was their silence. It was the way their eyes drifted away, as if they had already left the room long before I ever walked in. And here's something that will shock you about human psychology. Jung discovered that this kind of heartbreak isn't just emotional trauma. It's what he called an encounter with the shadow. Picture this. You're holding a rope with both hands, pulling with everything you've got. Your muscles are burning, your heart is racing, you're giving it absolutely everything, only to realize the rope has been cut on the other end. You're pulling on nothing. But you keep holding on because letting go feels like falling into what Jung called the abyss of the unconscious. The moment you realize you are the only one still reaching, still caring, still fighting, you're face to face with the unconscious parts of yourself that you've been avoiding. And what happens next will change how you see relationships forever. I spent so many days, maybe even years, in that space, over-explaining, proving, justifying, twisting myself into smaller and smaller shapes so I could still fit into their shrinking circle of care. Jung said this is the ego's desperate attempt to avoid individuation, the process of becoming who we truly are. You start to wonder, maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe if I try harder, smile more, argue less, make myself easier to love, Maybe then they'll stay. Maybe then they'll value me again. But here's the psychological trap that Jung warned us about. We panic when people stop valuing us because somewhere along the way, we started tying our worth to their attention. Jung discovered that this happens because we confuse our persona, the mask we wear for others, with our true self. We started measuring our enoughness based on their capacity to care. And when they stop seeing us, we stop seeing ourselves. Here's what most people don't understand about human behavior. It's not just about losing a person, it's about losing our reflection. When someone we love doesn't value us anymore, it feels like we disappear too. Jung called this psychological possession, when we allow others to hold our sense of self hostage. But here's what I've come to understand through years of studying Jungian psychology. The more we chase people who devalue us, the more we teach them that it's okay to devalue us. And this is where Jung's most revolutionary insight comes in. Every time we overextend, every time we explain for the 100th time why we matter, we're not just reaching, we're reinforcing. We're silently saying, "You can treat me this way. I'll still be here." According to Jung, this isn't because we're weak. It's because we're terrified of what he called the encounter with the self, the terrifying and beautiful process of discovering who we are when we're not performing for others. But here's the trick that changed my life, and it's rooted in Jung's deepest teachings. Stop explaining. Stop chasing. Stop performing. Stop filling the silence with justifications. Because silence isn't a punishment. It's what Jung called active imagination, a space where real transformation happens. Silence isn't revenge. It's self-respect. When you stop trying to convince someone to value you, you open the door for what Jung called the transcendent function, the bridge between your conscious and unconscious mind. And here's something that will blow your mind about the psychology of absence. Jung discovered that sometimes the loudest, most loving thing you can do is simply stand up from that table and walk away. Not with drama, not with tears streaming down your face, but with what he called dignified withdrawal. A quiet, steady step toward yourself. We live in this quiet terror that if we stop reaching out, if we stop trying, if we dare to go silent, and we'll simply vanish from their mind like we were never really there to begin with. But Jung's research on the human unconscious reveals something incredible. I've lived in that fear. I sat with it at midnight when the urge to send a text felt unbearable. I've stared at my phone, crafting the perfect sentence, the perfect reason to stay relevant, to remind them I still existed. Because deep down, I believed that if I didn't keep showing up, if I didn't keep knocking, they'd forget me. I thought silence was a death sentence. But here's what no one told me. This fear isn't just emotional, it's archetypal. Jung said our brains are wired with ancient patterns, and one of the strongest is the fear of abandonment. Our attachment system is so powerful that we will abandon ourselves just to avoid the sensation of being abandoned by someone else. We'll sacrifice our dignity to stay in someone's peripheral vision. We'll beg to be remembered even by the very people who made us feel invisible in the first place. But here's what shook me when I started really studying Jungian psychology. When you go silent, when you finally stop knocking on their door, the human brain doesn't move on as quickly as you think. In fact, Jung discovered that the absence of something is felt more powerfully than its constant presence. When someone is used to you being there, explaining, checking in, trying, chasing, your sudden silence doesn't go unnoticed. It creates what Jung called a psychological vacuum, a space in the unconscious that demands to be filled. And here's where Jung's insight becomes absolutely mind-blowing. Humans are profoundly uncomfortable with emotional vacuums. It's what Jung termed the compensation principle. When you remove yourself from someone's daily rhythm, their unconscious mind registers that absence more intensely than the noise you made while you were there. You don't need to beg to be remembered. You don't need to keep proving your presence. According to Jung, the psyche is built to notice what's gone, to feel the weight of absence more than the familiarity of presence. The real tragedy, and Jung saw this in his patients over and over, is that we spend so much time trying not to be forgotten by people who already made us feel forgettable. We fight to stay in lives that never fully welcomed us. And here's where the fear really cracks open. We're not afraid of being forgotten by just anyone. We're afraid of being forgotten by someone whose love we thought defined us, someone whose validation we believed we needed to feel worthy. But Jung said this is the ultimate betrayal of the self, making another human being responsible for our psychological completeness. You are not someone's afterthought. You are not a placeholder in their story. And you don't need to hustle for visibility in someone's life to prove that you matter. Jung discovered that this hustle is actually a form of neurosis, a compulsive behavior that keeps us from facing our own psychological truth. The simple truth is this: you don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes silence is the only language people finally understand. It's the quiet withdrawal of your energy, your time, your effort that rings the loudest in what Jung called the corridors of the unconscious. And when they finally notice your absence, when they feel the ache of the space you left behind, you won't be standing there waiting for them to remember. You'll already be somewhere else, somewhere where you are valued, not as a fading memory, but as a living, breathing, irreplaceable presence. Here's where Jung's understanding of the shadow becomes crucial. I remember being caught in this exhausting cycle with someone I cared about. A cycle where every conversation felt like a courtroom, and I was constantly on trial. I would spend hours, days, sometimes weeks, trying to explain how I deserved to be treated. Jung said this is what happens when we refuse to acknowledge our own shadow, the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. We project our need for validation onto others, making them responsible for our psychological well-being. It was like I was handing them the manual for how to love me, how to show up, how to be present. But no matter how many pages I added to that manual, they never seemed to read it. They never seemed to care. And yet, I stayed in that loop. I explained myself over and over like a broken record. According to Jung, over-explaining is actually a trauma response. It wasn't just a habit. It was a survival mechanism. It was me trying to control what was ultimately outside of my control. Jung discovered that over-explaining is often the echo of old wounds that taught us love is something we have to earn, something we have to justify, something that can be taken away if we don't keep performing perfectly. When we grew up having to justify our feelings, when we were dismissed or minimized, we internalized what Jung called the critical parent, a voice that says, "You are not enough unless you convince me you are." So we start to explain ourselves not just to the people who don't value us, but to everyone, our partners, our friends, our bosses, even strangers. We narrate our worth. We overclarify our intentions. We beg for understanding because we are terrified of being misunderstood. But here's what shook me when I finally stopped, and it aligns perfectly with Jung's teachings. People who truly value you don't need that level of explanation. They just get it. They just feel it. They honor you without needing a step-by-step guide on how to treat you well. And the people who require endless explanations, the ones who make you work so hard just to matter, they're not confused. They're comfortable. Comfortable knowing you'll keep bending. Comfortable knowing you'll keep justifying why you should be allowed to stay in their life. Jung discovered something called the power complex. It's when someone gives you just enough kindness to keep you hooked, but pulls away just enough to keep you chasing. This creates a psychological addiction. You keep trying to win back their attention, thinking it's about your worth, when in fact, it's about their need for control. It's a hard pill to swallow, but Jung was clear. You cannot convince someone to care. You cannot explain your way into being valued, and you cannot argue your way into being loved. The simple trick, according to Jungian psychology, stop explaining completely. Let your silence be the answer. Let your boundaries be the language you speak. Let your absence be your explanation. Because the truth is, if they wanted to, they would. If they truly valued you, they would show you without a script. Stop handing out blueprints on how to love you. The right people will build with you naturally. The wrong ones will expect you to construct the entire house and then question whether they even want to move in. You don't have to be a tour guide for your own worth. You just have to stand still long enough to see who actually chooses to walk beside you without needing a map. Here's what Jung discovered about the space that follows silence. The hardest part isn't walking away. It's what comes after. People think the silence is the end, that once you stop chasing, once you stop explaining, the chapter closes. But no one tells you about the brutal, raw space that follows, the space where you sit with yourself. No distractions, no conversations, no apologies to write, no texts to send, just you, alone. And that's where most people crack. That's where I cracked. I thought I was ready to let go. I thought I had the strength to go silent. But sitting in that silence, facing the deep ache of being ignored, discarded, or devalued, it's terrifying. Jung called this the dark night of the soul, the psychological space where we must face ourselves without the distraction of others' validation. It's in that silence where you start asking yourself the hardest questions. Did I make a mistake? Should I have tried harder? What if I'm not worth remembering? I remember pacing my room, picking up my phone, typing out long messages I never sent, just to feel like I was still connected somehow. I would hold my breath, waiting for their name to light up my screen. I'd fantasize about their return, their sudden realization that I was worth more than the way they treated me. But here's the quiet truth that Jung discovered. That moment when you're sitting in the pit of your own loneliness, when you're fighting the urge to chase, that is the birthplace of what Jung called psychological courage. Jung termed this distress tolerance, the ability to sit with painful feelings without running, without numbing, without rushing to fix them. Most of us don't fail at boundaries because we're weak. We fail because we can't stand the discomfort that comes with enforcing them. We think setting boundaries is the hardest part. But Jung knew better. Holding them is holding the silence, holding the ache, sitting in the quiet grief that follows when you no longer reach for the person who doesn't reach for you. And I won't sugarcoat it. It's going to feel like you're breaking. Every part of you will want to rush back, to fix it, to smooth it over, to settle for just a little bit of their attention so you don't have to feel the sharp edges of your own abandonment. But here's where Jung's understanding of transformation becomes beautiful. The longer you sit with that discomfort, the stronger you become. The longer you hold your silence, the more you realize you are capable of surviving the ache. You start to build what Jung called psychological muscle, a kind of quiet self-respect that doesn't scream, doesn't perform, doesn't beg. It just stands. It just holds. And eventually you begin to notice something miraculous. You don't miss them as much as you miss the version of you that believed you had to earn love. You grieve who you were when you thought you weren't enough. And slowly, the ache becomes a teacher. The silence becomes a sanctuary. Jung said, "You don't heal by avoiding pain. You heal by walking through it. You heal by proving to yourself that you can stand in the storm of your own longing and not abandon yourself this time." The real power, according to Jung, isn't in who comes back or who notices you're gone. The real power is in who you become while you wait, who you choose to be when no one's watching, when no one's clapping, when no one's texting back. The courage to sit in that discomfort changes you. It recalibrates you. It teaches you that you are not made of glass. You don't shatter that easily. And the longer you hold the line, the clearer the truth becomes. Your silence might break your heart for a while, but begging would have shattered your soul forever. When no one's watching, when no one's clapping, when no one's texting back, the courage to sit in that discomfort changes you. It recalibrates you. It teaches you that you are not made of glass. You don't shatter that easily. And the longer you hold the line, the clearer the truth becomes. Your silence might break your heart for a while, but begging would have shattered your soul forever. There's something no one really prepares you for, what Jung called the emergence of the authentic self. What happens after the silence, after the aching, after the hours, days, maybe even months, where you sat with your trembling hands, your unanswered questions, your untied endings. At first, the quiet feels like punishment, like exile, like you've been locked out of a life you desperately wanted to be part of. You wonder if you made the right choice to stop reaching. You wonder if you'll ever feel wanted again. But here's what Jung discovered about psychological transformation. There's this agonizing space where it seems like nothing is happening, but something is happening. Something beautiful. Something that doesn't make a lot of noise, but changes everything. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, your attention begins to shift. At first, it's microscopic. You stop checking your phone as much. You stop watching their life from a distance, hoping for a crack in the wall. You start noticing other things. How the sunlight feels when it touches your skin. How your chest feels a little less heavy. How your own voice sounds when you're not bending it to keep the peace. And here's what's remarkable. The longer you stop pouring your energy into being valued by someone else, the more that energy starts flowing back to you. Jung called this the return of libido, psychological energy coming back to its rightful owner. One day you'll catch yourself laughing, and it won't be for show. It won't be an act to prove you're over it. It will be genuine. It will surprise you. One day you'll walk past a place that used to haunt you, and you won't flinch. One day you'll realize you haven't thought about them in days, maybe even weeks. And in that moment, you'll understand that you didn't just survive. You outgrew the space you were begging to belong to. It's a quiet shift, but Jung knew it was life-altering. You start to become more protective of your energy. You begin to realize how valuable your time, your care, your attention truly are. You start asking harder questions before you give people access to you. Questions like, do they make me feel safe? Do they show up without being chased? Do I feel like I can be fully myself here? The thing is, we spend so much of our lives trying to be chosen, but what happens next after the silence is that you realize you are the one who gets to choose now. And this is where the whole story flips, just as Jung predicted. The people who didn't value you may try to come back. They may sense the space you've created, the peace you've built, the quiet power you've stepped into, and they may knock. They may test the door. But the version of you that opens that door now is not the same person who once stood there begging. You don't return to prove a point. You don't re-engage to show them you've changed. You simply realize that their table was never worthy of your hunger in the first place. The beautiful shift is this. You stop fighting to be seen and you start choosing where to be seen. You stop grasping for scraps and you start sitting at your own table, where you are both the guest and the host. Jung said, the most powerful thing we can ever do is not to walk away, not to let go, but to stay gone, to trust that what's meant for us will never require us to chase, perform, or explain our way into being valued. Because when you finally reach that place, when you realize you are no longer waiting to be called back, you'll find something far more beautiful than being wanted. You'll find yourself. So when someone doesn't value you anymore, try this simple trick that Jung would have endorsed. Go silent, not to punish them, but to finally hear yourself and watch what happens next, not to them, but to you. Because the best plot twist is always the one where you finally choose yourself. And that, my friends, is how you reclaim your power. The silence isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of the chapter where you become the author of your own worth. Thank you for staying with me through this exploration. If this resonated with you, remember your silence isn't a punishment. It's a gift to yourself. And sometimes, that's the most powerful gift of all. If these words, echoes of thought, something deep within you, leave a comment not just for me, but for those who might read it and realize they're not alone. What does silence mean to you now? I'd love to hear. Share this with someone who's learning to reclaim their inner stillness. And if you'd like to keep walking this path of reflection and healing, follow the channel. Your journey is welcome here.